So now we have two functions, one to control the lights and one to control the pump. In this video, I'm going to be going over how to test different segments of code. There are multiple ways we could test our code. The first and most basic one would just be to copy the code we have to our RPI with SCP and then run main.py. This is definitely not the best way, primarily because we have two different functions that have yet to be tested. We'd be testing both functions simultaneously. Testing new code is similar to science experiments in the sense that you only want one independent variable. In science, you only test one thing at a time. You wouldn't test, say, temperature and salinity at the same time. You test one of them independently. It's the same in programming. We want to test our manage pump and our manage lights functions independently, ideally without writing too much extra code or having to change the code we've already written. It would be great if in pump.py or in lights.py, we could just call manage pump or manage lights respectively, and then to test it, we could just run lights.py or pump.py. This sadly wouldn't work, and to achieve the desired outcome, we will need to use the __name __ variable. I'm just going to be calling this name from now on. This is a built-in variable that you don't have to define. To understand its use, we have to understand how imports work. When I import a file or import a function from a file, the Python interpreter runs the entire file. So, say I import a function from a file. Let's call it test.py and say I import this function called func. Let's just call the function, we'll just be adding something. It doesn't really matter what it is. But then also in this test.py file, I'll write a simple print statement that prints hello. So let's save that and then go back to main.py and then let's try and run main.py, which will import this function from test.py. And as you can see, hello is printed, even though we only imported func. We didn't just say import test.py, we said from test.py import func. So even though we only imported one function, the Python interpreter ran the whole file. And this is because when you import a file, or even if you import a function from a file, the entire file is ran. So in our project, when we import manage lights or manage pump from each of their two respective files, the entire file is ran. So this is why we can't just, at the bottom of lights.py or pump.py, we can't just call manage lights or manage pump. Because then when we imported those files in main.py, those function calls would be ran, which obviously we don't want. So this is where the name variable comes in. If you run a file, like if you say python main.py, name __ name is equal to the string __ main. I'll write it out here. But if you import a file, then __ name __ does not equal main. So this gives us a way to tell if a file was imported or we are directly running it. Now obviously this is useful because we can then write code which will only be ran if we run the file rather than importing it. To show this, let's put the print statement in test.py in an if statement. And then we can run main.py again. It didn't print this time. But if we run test.py directly, hello is printed. And this is because when we ran test.py directly, __ name equaled __ main, because we were running it directly. But when we imported it, it didn't, because it was imported. So tying this back into our project, we can then call manage pump and manage lights inside an if statement, which checks if we're calling the function directly, or if we're calling the file directly rather, without messing up main.py. So we can test each of our functions independently without changing any of our other code or writing too much extra code. And this is really useful because it reduces the amount of stuff we have to change to test, and it makes testing really easy because now we can test each function independently by just running the file itself, and we don't have to change anything else. So this is the best way to check code. So from here, we can save everything and copy it over to the Raspberry Pi, and then we can set stuff up, and then we'll run the tests. So to copy it over to our Raspberry Pi, we're just going to be using the SCP, which I talked about in an earlier tutorial. So while it's going on, I just want to talk about the purpose of this video. So I'm just going to be going through my thought process while debugging code, because in reality, 90% of writing code is debugging and realizing why it's not doing what you want it to do. So this is just going to be going through how I work with debugging code and how you guys can hopefully take some information from that so that you can debug your own code so you're not following a tutorial like this. So let's just SSH in, and we had everything copied, so we'll just move to the hydroponics session, and let's just try and run our code. So python 3 pump.py. We get this error that GPI is not defined, so let's look at our code. And that makes sense, right? Because if you're just running pump.py, there's no GPIO variable. And matter of fact, there's also no pump_pin variable defined. And that's because we define all that stuff in main.py because we assume we'd only be running pump.py from main.py. But in reality, that's not what we want, right? Because we want to be able to test pump.py on its own. So let's just copy some of these definitions in over from main.py to the top of pump.py so that when we run it independently, it's able to work on its own. So we have those definitions. So we'll just copy over the imports, pump pin, and then some of the setup functions that comes from the GPIO module. So we just need to log out, which you can do by typing logout or Control-D on your keyboard, and then copy everything in with SCP and start another session with SSH. So go back into Hydroponics, and just to make sure that we're on the right version, I'll use the command nano, and you can see that all our definitions are at the top of the file, which is good because that means we're on the right version. So let's try and run it now. And what you should be able to see is, if I show you the pump on screen, you should be able to see the light on the relay turn on, which means that there's power going to the pump. Obviously, it's hard to see that the pump is turned on because they don't have any water, but you just have to take my word for it that the pump is actually on. So when we call the function, if you remember what it does, it turns the pump on for 5 minutes and then turns it off for 4 hours. So when I when I call the function, you should see the light on the relay turn on. Let's see if it works. It does, yay! So light turns on. So now what we want to do is make sure that our timing is right. So let's wait 5 minutes and then see if the light turns on and the pump turns, see if the light turns off and the pump turns off. So I'll come back in 5 minutes and we'll see if it works. Okay, and we're back. And the light should turn off any second now, and that should mean our pump is turned off. Hopefully. Yay! Okay, cool, our code works. So now we can just close the program with Control-C, which quits it, because I don't want to wait 4 hours. I'm assuming that time.sleep works. And if you see, we ended in that time.sleep, which is right. And what we can do here actually is just copy all of our code into this __name __ main section, because we don't want to redefine everything when we call it from main.py. We only want that stuff to be defined if we're calling the function independently. Because if we're calling it from main.py, you'll have a lot of redefinitions, and you'll have a lot of those initialization functions be called multiple times, which can mess with GPIO, the GPIO module, and we don't really want that. So we'll just have all that stuff inside the __ name if statement, so that we only do it if we're calling only that function. So now I'm just going to go over to the lights, because this is going to have a similar issue, and we're just going to have the same solution where we define everything inside the if __ name _ equals main. So now to be able to check the lights, obviously I need to do the light setup, and to get those set up, I'm just going to be following the tutorial we did before to set up the lights, except I'm not going to be using the breadboard, same thing as when I set up the pump. So let me get that set up, and then we'll be back. Okay, here we are, the lights are set up, you see them at the bottom, and when I run main.py, when I run lights.py, what we expect to happen is that the lights don't turn on, right? And the reason that is because it's not in the, like if you look at the clock, it's 3 p.m., which is when we don't want the lights on. We only want the lights on in the evening. So what we expect, the expected behavior is the light should stay off. So let's just try that. First, I'll check this, make sure that I'm on the right version here. Okay, and then we'll run lights.py. And you see the lights don't turn on, which is good. We don't want the lights to be on. So everything seems to be working well. The problem is here is that we're kind of getting no output because we're not printing anything, and then the lights are also not turning on. So it's possible that our code just isn't working and we don't know. So let's add in some debug print statements here. So what I'm going to do is when I get the hour, I'm just going to print what the hour is. And this will make sure that we're getting the right time from our datetime function. And this will verify that our if statements are working. Because it's kind of tough to debug a program that does nothing, which is effectively what it does, because the lights aren't turning on, it's not printing anything. So in order to kind of remedy that, let me just print what the hour is, and then from there I can assume if our if statements are going to work correctly. So I think that'll be good, because since I'm trying to debug this and make sure that it works before I say that it's good, I kind of want some sort of output. So I got an error here. Inconsistent use of tabs and spacing. This is the worst Python error ever. It's the only language that cares about if you use tabs or spaces to indent things. You can use either one, but if you use them both in one program, the interpreter really doesn't like it. So it's really annoying. But here we go. we print it, and you can see that it is printing the right time in 24-hour clock, which is good. It's printing 14, and we're in the like 2 in the afternoon, almost 3. So that's right. So it's getting the right time from the datetime function, which means that if we look at our if statements, we can assume they're working. The problem here is if you can see that there we go. So we call main.py and we get an error here. And the reason that is because we didn't actually do any correct cleanup when we closed the last function. And I also have the wrong variable, which is also pretty important because I changed it. But when you end a GPIO program, you usually want to call the cleanup function, which we didn't do in that last one. So like when you finish a GPIO, a program that uses the GPIO pins, you want to call, if you see in that main.py, you want to call the GPIO, and we didn't do that, which is a problem. And also, I'm just going to define those at the top because it was some reason messing up with global variables, and that's something weird with Python. Global variables are really inconsistent, so especially when you're using multiple files, it's easier just to line things up at the top rather than deal with global variables from another file. So let me just check and make sure. So yeah, we'll go into Hydroponics. And now we should just be able to run it, but first let me check that we're on the right version for everything. So I define my variable up at the top because it just is easier and we don't get as many errors. And then I'm going to do the same thing where I print hour here because I deleted that when I copied it over from my home computer. Let me make sure I indent with tabs here because that would be bad. So now we can just call main.py and hopefully it works. So the light turns on, that means our pump's on, and we're printing our lights output. So everything's good, right? We are printing our lights output, our lights didn't turn on, which will be expected, our pump turned on, and then 5 minutes our pump turns off again. So that's good. Everything's working as planned. So I hope this video was helpful in showing you guys how you can go through and debug programs. And if you remember, you just go through, run things independently. Like first I ran pump.py, I found all the problems, fixed them, and then I ran lights.py, found the problem, fixed them, and then only then did I run the program that combined the two. So that's the best way to do it, is take it bit by bit, and then kind of think of it as almost like you're expecting a certain outcome, and then how come your real outcome didn't meet that outcome. So like, how come I got this error? How come this happened when I thought this would happen? And then you can remedy that in your code. So breaking it down into simple functions like this really helps fix a lot of those problems. So yeah, now we know that our lights and our pumps, they work together, which is great. And now once we do the water sensor, we're pretty much done. So yeah, this is getting pretty close to done. I hope this is helpful.